Okay. Okay. So, as always, I feel very, very privileged um, to bring on another incredible woman who has an amazing story, an amazing journey. Daniela Yisrael is a seasoned social worker with over 2 decades of experience, dedicated to supporting individuals through trauma, from hospice to foster care settings. As a first responder and life coach, Daniela brings a unique perspective and depth of understanding to the challenges faced by those navigating difficult circumstances. Beyond her professional expertise, her personal journey is equally compelling, uncovering her family's hidden Jewish heritage, which had been forced into secrecy for over 500 years during the Inquisition. Daniela embraced her heritage and returned to Judaism, adding another layer of richness and complexity to her life's narrative. With a commitment to compassion, resilience, and cultural understanding, Daniela inspires audiences with both her professional insights and her remarkable personal story of rediscovery and identity. As a public speaker, Daniela brings empathy, wisdom, and a profound understanding of the human experience, making her a powerful voice in the field of social work and trauma recovery. Daniela, are you here?
I'm here. How are you?
Good. How are you doing? I'm going to go off. Thank you so much, Daniela. Thank you. We're so excited. Thank you.
You. Hey, everybody. I am so honored to be here. Such beautiful, beautiful tefillot. So to just see it. So my name is Daniela Israel, and I currently reside in Sfat, Israel. And my journey started very, very, very far from here. My family is originally from Mexico. My father's family immigrated into the United States. I was raised devoutly Christian in another faith, very, very strongly religious family. I would consider it almost the Haredi world of the Christian world was how I was raised. Went on missions trips, just had a very different experience. At the time, my grandmother became ill and was passing away. I was called to be by her side, at which point she asked me to take home this beautiful a picture of myself. It was very large, and nobody but a grandmother would put this on their wall. And so I found myself, if you know my grandmother, her name was Esther. You listened to Esther and you did what she said. So I took this big photo home, and my grandmother soon passed away. May her neshama have an aliyah from this discussion. And I was repurposing the frame. And as I was repurposing this frame, I opened it and found all of the immigration papers and all of the information about our family. And that took me on a journey that led me to find all of the Inquisition records of our family. And my grandmother had told me little stories, little bits of things. We were in Mexico for 500 years. We helped found one of the major cities in Jalisco, Lagos de Moreno. And so our family had this rich, very Christian tradition. And yet my grandmother had many customs that did not align with Catholicism. So it was a little confusing. She didn't mix meat and dairy. She lit candles every Friday night. She said that you need to not do laundry on Saturdays. That's where she held. Very interesting things that were there that I just thought were Mexican and Catholic, and I had no idea. And as I began to uncover Inquisition record after Inquisition record, I was left kind of astounded that my family were Jews. And it was very, very clear. I found over 17 Inquisition records of my family being burned at the stake in Mexico and in Spain. And this obviously, I was confused, I was distraught, and I was trying to figure out how do I come to terms with my family was being burned alive, and yet we're Christians today. And why are we Christians? And it brought so many questions into my mind, and it took me on a journey. And so I want to talk about the beautiful privilege of getting to be Jewish, and what that looks like, and how absolutely blessed we are today to have that privilege to walk around and be openly Jewish. And so for 500 years, my family did not have that privilege. They were hidden. Many of my family were murdered, burned at the stake for trying to circumcise children, trying to have chuppah, trying to do basic things. The most recent family member was in 1840 in Mexico City, burned alive for putting on a white shirt on Shabbat. He wasn't able to keep anything else, but he tried to put on a clean white shirt and was reported to the Inquisition and burned alive. And the record changed my life as I got to read the record. The Catholic Church kept very, very detailed records. And as he was being burned alive, he was screaming the Shema. And so that was documented in this message. And so that took me on this journey of, wait, why was he screaming this verse in the Old Testament as I at the time knew it? And why did it matter in my life? And it took me on a huge journey all the way back to Judaism. And so I was able to return. I had to convert formally because the records were so mishmashed. We do know that I was Jewish, but we had to kind of go through that whole process. I did, conversion, became Jewish. And what it has really shown me is this very, very important detail of our generation. We get to be Jewish. And so many generations before us have had so much come up that has not allowed them to. And this war definitely brought it up. I happened to be in Hutz La'aretz at the time that the war broke out. I was in Atlanta, Georgia. And I remember probably 3 or 4 days after getting ready to go out and shop and telling my son, put a baseball cap on and tuck in your tzitzit. I think everyone that was in Hutz La'aretz felt that moment. And it took me back and it made me realize that, it is such a privilege. I live here in Eretz Yisrael in Sfat, and we have the ability, I don't ever walk down the street being worried, about my son's tzitzits hanging out, and so it was such a wake up call for me and understanding. And a lot of people use the term Marano. Marano is a very common term for the people that were forced to convert. And the word Marano actually means pig eater. And it was a word not used by the non-Jews. It was used by our fellow Jews when we had been forced to convert and were now being Christian. Our fellow Jews would call us pig eaters. And there was a line that was drawn. And so slowly these communities separated because of the pressure. And so it just really brings me to a place of Ahavas Yisrael and the importance of no matter where a Jew is holding, no matter where a Jew is at, in their walk, in their derek at that moment, whether they're completely non-religious, whether they're the most religious you've ever met, of just really getting back to a place of Ahavat Israel and loving every Jew and meeting them exactly where they are. When I walked into a synagogue for the first time, I did not have any of the proper lingo. I actually called it a church because I didn't know any better. I asked the rabbi, when are church services? I was very offensive. I didn't get it. I didn't know. And so I want to encourage everybody that we have so many people coming home. I just had a beautiful Shabbat meal at my home. We had over 45 people here, different boys, Bal Tshuva from all over the world being gathered. And it really hit me that everyone had their own flavor. Everyone was coming back into Torah with a different upbringing, a different outlook, a different hairstyle. We had people with ponytails. We had people clean cut. It was so beautiful to see the diversity that is Am Yisrael. And I think that has been really what's hit me, and especially as coming back here to Eretz Yisrael, is seeing the power of our achdut, of being one, of coming together as Am Yisrael. And for 500 years, my family had to pretend they were not Jewish. They had to openly be Christian. My father was actually sent to Mexico City at 12 years old to become a priest because it was the family's tradition to give the firstborn son back to God in the only way that they could, because they couldn't openly be Jewish. And it also helped to alleviate doubt that family were loyal Christians and they weren't afraid of persecution. So even in my grandmother's generation, she still lived with the fear of even being known as a Jew. And yet at the same time, she checked her eggs. And she made sure that her enchiladas were only made of cheese and her tacos never, she never put cheese on her, she separated it all. And so it was such a beautiful thing. And it's brought me, I sometimes wondered, why wasn't I raised with my Jewish identity? Why didn't I grow up knowing the truth? Why did I have to grow up in Avodah Zarah? And now I realize that I get this beautiful gift of knowing both worlds. I get this beautiful gift of being able to help other Jews that have gone into and fallen prey to this world in a way that someone who hasn't experienced that world can't do. And so really understanding Gamzu Tova and Hashem's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful plan in the whole world that sometimes we don't see. I think here in Eretz Yisrael, we're experiencing daily nisim. This morning we were hearing entourages of rockets hitting and coming in. And as we do it, you see this calmness, you see this beauty of, we know Hashem is with us, and we know Hashem is protecting us. And my son's Rebbe sent a message to me just telling me, hey, because I was, still adjusting to the whole war thing here. And he sent a message of the boys just singing and just praising Hashem in the bomb shelter. And it was such a powerful moment for me to understand, this is what Am Yisrael is. This is our core essence. No matter what, no matter where we're holding, no matter what's going on in the world, no matter who's throwing rockets, who's burning us alive, this is who we are at our core. And so getting, it's such a beautiful gift. We get to openly be Jewish. We get to worship Hashem. We get to dress Sanua. We get to do these things. And so it's such a powerful reminder to all of us to pay attention every day. Sometimes we're like, oh, I have to daven. Oh, I have to do this. I get, right? We got to gather from women all over the world today, right? We didn't have to hide. We didn't have to go into a basement. We didn't have to pretend. We got to get on a social media platform today and daven for all of Am Yisrael is one. And that's so powerful for us to always remember that, and for us to go back to that. And so as I went through my journey, I remember just being so excited. Wow, I get to light Shabbat candles. Wow, I'm keeping Shabbat for the first time. And some people tell me like, wow, you're so excited. And I'm like, do you understand? For 500 years, my family couldn't do this. My grandmother couldn't do this. She told me very close to her death, I said to her, like, please tell me, like, what's going on? And she said, I was born a Catholic and I'm going to have to die a Catholic, but you don't have to. Keep seeking, keep finding, and she said, there's only one God, and that's all you have to know. And so 500 years later, the power of a Jewish neshama, the only thing she had left to kind of hand over was that Hashem was one. And I just found it so powerful. And it took me on a journey. I moved away from everything I knew. I started over. Actually, I had to live in an RV with my children for about a year to save up money to move into the Jewish neighborhood. I was a single mom at the time. And so it's so amazing to have this opportunity, right? Not just to have to do something, but to we get to keep the Torah. We get to keep the mitzvot, and we get to do so publicly. We get to do so without shame. We get to do so powerfully. And I think that really encouraged me. And as I sat there and kind of had to check myself that day when I told my son, put a baseball cap on and tuck in your tzitzit, I said, it's time to go home. It's time to go back home. And we got on a plane and we came back here to Eretz Yisrael. And it's been so powerful to get to experience the akdut that is currently here in Eretz Yisrael. For any of you guys that are here, you know what I'm talking about. There's a shift. There's a shift in Am Yisrael, and there's a shift even in our Medina. So I want you to not think for 1 second that our prayers are not getting places. That I think 500 years ago, I had one female Jewish ancestor who davened, and she sent her children to Mexico, not knowing what would ever be. And 500 years later, I'm sitting here because that woman's prayers. And so it's so important. I get a little emotional about it because I was able to actually find letters from this woman and her story. She ended up dying in a convent in Spain. And so her only prayer was that her children and her descendants would know. And it's so funny because I have met, since I've been back here in Eretz Yisrael, I have met probably 7 or 8 people that are from this same woman, same person. Her name is Vilente la Pelicana. They called her the Pelican because of her nose. She was made fun of by the Catholics, and that was her name. And we were all descendants, and I'm seeing now thousands and thousands of this woman's descendants returning, formally converting, many of them not even knowing. I know someone that converted, and 50 years later, she found out she was a descendant and she was actually from this woman's line. So I just, the power of prayer, the power of these moments that we're coming together as a woman, we can't ever take them for granted. And we have to remember that no matter what Am Yisrael is looking like coming home, right? I was coming home without the right lingo. I was saying all the wrong things. I didn't know how to speak Hebrew. I didn't know how to greet someone. I think I shook my rabbi's hand, unfortunately, the very first time I met him. I didn't know what I was doing. And I came home. And I'm so grateful to the people that were just gracious, and they just let us in the door, and they loved on us, and they said, welcome home. And I feel like we have so much of that happening. The estimates are as high as 70% of Latin America have Jewish blood, not necessarily halakhically Jewish, but Zera Israel. They're the seed, right? And so many of these people are coming out of Christianity. They're walking away in some of the largest numbers we've seen. Right now, there's communities all over Mexico that I've been assisting with, and they've been going through conversion and returning. And so this is prophecy in front of us. And so I challenge everybody here to continue to pray, not just for who we know is Jewish, but for all of those neshamot that are out there, that are seeking Hashem, that are returning, and coming back, and that we should treat them with love. We should embrace them and embrace everyone. This is really the key. I've seen so much achdut just coming out right now in Eretz Yisrael, seeing people don't know each other all over the world getting together. We have people here in Spot driving to the front lines in Lebanon and dropping off challah, and we have our boys coming in, and we're hosting them, as they're taking breaks, a day or two off. And so we have to see the power of this generation. And you guys spoke earlier about the power of a woman, right? The power of the Geula coming through the women. And I think back to this 500-year-old, ancestor who spent the rest of her life in a convent reading Tehillim and wishing that someday I would be sitting here having this conversation. And it's so powerful. So never, ever, ever underestimate the power of our prayer, number one, and our ability to impact not just ourselves, but for generation. We don't know who we're praying for. We don't know what is going to be in 2 months. We don't know what's going to be in 3 months. But when we take that time to connect with Hashem, our prayers are going for generations and generations and generations. And so we have to understand the impact, the ripple that is possible from our prayers. We're not just saying Tehillim. We're saying the same words that every Jewish woman for thousands of years have come together and prayed every time. As I left Eretz Yisrael, about right before the war, I left, and I stood at the Kotel, and I just thanked Hashem. I thanked him for the ability and the honor to return, because so many people don't even know. They don't even know. They don't have the ability. They didn't have the means or whatever it was that I was granted the zechut to get to be Jewish, And I have a lot of people ask me, like, why? You didn't have to take it on. You could have stayed in Noahide. You could have kept eating ham sandwiches. And it wasn't a choice. For me, it wasn't a choice. I had 500 years of women that had been davening and praying. And today, my children are being raised in Eretz Yisrael. They learn Torah in Lashon Kodesh. They're Israeli citizens, and that is what it's about. That is why our soldiers are on the front line. It's why we're fighting, the whole world essentially right now, right? We're standing against the whole world. And I think this is the generation where we have to get to a place where we say we're no longer going to apologize for being Jewish. We're no longer going to apologize or hide the light that Am Yisrael is. We're going to shift into a place of power, and especially us women, we have so much power to think that 500 years later, this woman's prayers were answered. And she has thousands of descendants coming home and returning to Judaism, one woman, right? And to think that we're each one woman, but how many descendants are we going to have? Our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. And so just remembering to instill Ahavat Israel, number one, in everyone, right? No matter what they look like, no matter how they're coming home, whatever it looks like, we have to embrace Am Yisrael. We have to. Priscilla says she's also on this journey. It's a journey home. It's a journey home, and everyone is going to be in a different place. And I think it's such a beautiful thing for us to just be able to grab everyone, pull them in, and just love on them exactly where they are. I'm so grateful to all of the people along my journey that just said, come on, let's go, and welcomed me home. And I know that hasn't always been the case. It hasn't. It's not always the case when a Latin, person walks into a Beit Knesset. It isn't always their experience. I've heard people that have been treated very differently. And I'm so grateful that that was not personally my journey. I was greeted with love and respect. And so I just encourage everyone to see the world through a different lens and know that we are supposed to be a light to the nations. And even as we're looking at the nations, that nation is sprinkled with all of our people who are coming home as we bring in this Geula. So I just encourage everyone to continue to daven for yourself, your family, your children, your descendants, and for Am Yisrael as a whole. Thank you.
Daniela, first of all, I just, before I open it up to everybody, I just have to say a few things. Like, you're crying. I think the rest of us are also crying. Because, you hit on a few points. I want to ask you a couple of questions to explain more, but you hit on a few points. You said, we can be Jews, right? We get to be Jews, right? And I think we forget that we get to be Jews, right? The concept that we get the opportunity to be Jewish, we get the opportunity to be this nation, that is so, and exactly like you say, like, if you look, I know all over the world, Jews are doing incredible things.
Yes.
And I know the giving and the tzedakah and the collecting and the feeling and all that is unbelievable. But when you look at Eretz Yisrael now, it is something that is really indescribable right now, right?
Yeah.
Totally indescribable. The feeling here is getting more intense, of this closeness that you feel that you can't explain to anybody, to Hashem. You even don't feel like you don't even want to leave right now. Because, am I right?
Yeah.
But I have to ask you something. I'm just so emotional now but I have to ask you something. So when you go back to 500 years, Daniela, so that first woman, who were the descendants that were burned on the stake, which is so interesting, because when you think about it, look what just happened in Be'eri. They were burnt, right? Think about it. They were mamish burnt alive. It's almost like history repeats itself in a different way. This woman that davened and ended up in a convent, right? In a convent.
Yes.
So she was, before her, they were burned at the stake, and she was the one that survived. How did it work?
No. So what happened is, the way the Catholic Church works is, none of the Jews that did not convert did they have jurisdiction over. So in 1492, anybody who was still Jewish openly was forced to leave, right? We were kicked out. And so many of the families left. Many of the families were force converted. So many, like one of the Inquisition records I was looking at, what they did was they took, Lo Aleinu, we should ever know this, they took their children, they took them and force baptized their children, and then came back and said, if you want your children back, you have to be baptized. If not, we're going to send them to good Christian homes, and you'll never see them again. So Lo Aleinu, we should ever be in that situation where we're faced with such things. So many of the families converted. Many of the families were forced to convert. And many of them were, held with, either you're going to die or you're going to convert. So there was a lot of pogroms and mass conversions that took place across Spain. Some of the families did so by choice or for monetary gain. There's a wide range of where things actually led. And so these families, the people that were burned at the stake, were later. They were openly living as Christians, but still were too Jewish for the Catholic Church's liking. And so whether they put on clean shirts, or they were caught with, reading something in Hebrew, or, doing anything that remotely, turning down pork at an event, things like this nature, they would be brought on trial and they would then be burned alive. So many of my family members had already forcibly been converted out and were living openly as Christians, but still killed and burned alive because of this.
So that descendant who was, so from her came all those, even the ones that were burned on the stake. She was like the one, and then she was forced to go into a convent. Is that what happened?
She was sent into exile because she'd had all these children. Her children were sent to Mexico. It's absolutely a nace beyond any nace I can see, because my father actually from her has unbroken female descendants all the way down. There was no break in the line. So the women were, crypto Jews, exactly. They were completely preserved for whatever reason it was. And then the Catholic Church refused to allow new Christians and old Christians to marry. So what they essentially did was forced the Jews to continue intermarrying with only other Jews for 500 years. So even as far as my grandmother's generation, they were only allowed to marry within certain families. Yes. Yeah.
But how did the knowledge go from generation to generation that your grandmother gave you this photo, right? This, right, with all the paperwork. How did that happen?
So
who did the research?
So my grandmother had an oral tradition from her mother that was very blurry. It was literally due to technology today that I was able to uncover all of the things. She had very little bits and pieces. She explained that we came directly from this woman who married into the crown, but because she was not Jewish, or she was Jewish, she was not Christian. She didn't tell me she was Jewish because she was not a Christian, is what she told me. Those children were not considered legitimate, and they were sent to Mexico, and we founded Lagos de Moreno in Mexico, our family. So I then was able to, using Ancestry.com and many of those things, the Catholic Church keeps impeccable records of all of their crimes. And so they have all of the records and all of the family lines. And I was able to find and go backwards generation by generation by generation from what my grandmother gave me, the paperwork she gave me, all the way back, and was able to find all of these Inquisition records and proof that my father is actually halachically Jewish with an unbroken, complete line. My mom, I wasn't able to prove it as easily, and so I went through the conversion process.
But my question is, were these documentations that your grandmother had, were they passed down from generation to generation?
No, these were just the most recent 2 generations that she had, and from there I was able to find them.
Now, did anybody else come back from the family?
Yes, my father actually, he was a pastor, and he left Christianity and is now on his journey into Judaism and keeping Shabbat. Wow. And so, yes, definitely my family is, some of them have come on a journey. Others are still very devoutly Christian. So it is a line that I have to kind of walk, and make sure that I'm respectful of my family and where they are. And yet at the same time, want to scream from the rooftops, by the way, you're all Jewish, please stop. So it's a definite fine line of just giving pieces. And so when they ask questions, I'm open and I talk about it. And I've shared, there's actually some YouTube videos that show our entire family line and their, them being burned at the stake and all of the records. So it's out there as public record for our family.
So 2 more questions before I open it up. So another question that I have for you is, the family members that have now been exposed to it. First of all, when you think about it, thousands of Jews just through your ancestor have been lost. Thousands of Jews, right?
Absolutely.
So the ancestors, the family members that see the documentation, doesn't it shake their faith in Christianity to think that this is what the Catholic Church did to the Jews, and them being faithful Catholics? Like, doesn't that shake them? Or it's so far already that they can't?
Yeah, I've gotten a really big array of responses from our family and my cousins, and from complete curiosity and wanting to know more, to others saying, that's great, we're like double saved because Jesus was a Jew too. So I've really gotten a really broad response. And then I've had family that completely refused to speak to me and have disowned me and want nothing to do with me because I left, the faith that our family was a part of. So it's been really diverse in the reaction. I definitely believe there's been some seeds planted and people are learning, and everybody's on their own journey. My grandmother, I think she intentionally left me with these clues. Some of the other family members weren't given these clues. And I think she knew that I would follow that. And at birth, my father gave me the name Daniela. That was my birth name, and which means Hashem is my judge. And so I really feel like that was the nevuah that he received at the moment that he gave me that name. And when I converted actually on my grandmother's yard site. And I took on her name, which was Esther. So I am Daniela Esther as a result.
Now, are you the first one? Are you the real first one after 500 years of action? It took 500 years for the first descendant to come back to Yiddishkeit?
Yes.
Whoa, that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So how many generations is that actually?
I am 15 generations from Violente.
Wow, it's unbelievable when you think about it.
Yeah.
Wow, I want to open it up to a few questions.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. Wow, and you have how many children do you have?
2 children, Baruch Hashem.
Two boys. I understand.
A daughter and a son.
A daughter and a son. Wow, unbelievable. Really something. I don't. It's so unbelievable what your story and the way you express it and the way that you give it over, and even how emotional you get about becoming a Jew.
Not
so many
always,
people.
Always so emotional. Something about the davening right before and hearing all the women. I was just like,
but I know, but Daniela, we take it for granted. Like even you said, like you said something so amazing. Like here we are, women from all over the world who come in. We have the choice. We're allowed to do this. Yeah. We can do it. Yeah. We can do it. And if we would live with that thinking, we can do it. I think that we would act completely in a very different way to understand that we get to do it. Right. We get to do it. Unbelievable. Yeah. Wow. I'm just speechless. I know I'm not acting speechless, but it's unbelievable. Wow. So any questions? Charlene, you want to ask a question? Charlene, you want to ask a question? We can't hear you. Anybody else want to ask a question? Charlene, go ahead, Ellen.
I was wondering, when did this journey begin? When did unfortunately, your grandmother pass away, that you just went into this exploration? How long has it become that you found your heritage?
It's been 11 years since that journey started. But it took several years, obviously, to get to the point where I had formally converted. But that journey started about 11 years ago.
Wow. But Sheva, do you want to ask something?
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you, so your current husband you met in Israel?
Yes. Yes.
Very nice.
Wow. Okay.
For you.
Charlene, let's see if we can hear you. Charlene? No, anybody else have a question? Anybody want to ask Daniela something?
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead. Who is this? From it?
Yeah. Well,
go ahead, from
Daniela, I've worked with women who converted before, especially from the Anusim community. Yeah. And one of the things I was very interested in, did your family, when they swept, did they sweep everything in the middle?
Yes, we did.
Okay. What does that mean? Explain that.
So we were not allowed to have mezuzot. So the minhag that became that we would sweep everything into the center of the room instead of out of a door, out of kavod for the mezuzot that should be there. And so it is a standard anusim practice. There's certain things, the checking of eggs, the lighting of candles. My grandmother would do so, unfortunately, with idols on the candles to be hidden and be able to still light candles, but all of the minhags they kept. My grandmother covered mirrors when we sat shiva. It wasn't shiva, but they cover mirrors when someone dies. There were many practices.
And she didn't know why she was. Did she have any
My mom
idea?
did it. I asked her. I said, "Why are we covering mirrors?" Because my mother did. That's what we do. No idea. No connection. No connection. Why do we check eggs? I don't know.
What about the thing that you explained, that the idea of the name Murano, right, is a negative thing? Could you explain that more? It was the Jews that used that negative connotation?
Yes.
And why?
And it was because anytime as a people when we disagree on something. So there was obviously a lot of hostility in this time in Spain, and people said, no, you have to stay Jewish. And other people said, no, we can't die. We can't lose our children. Everyone were making all of these cheshbons. They were making all of these calculations. And so the family like mine that made the decision to become Christian were called Muranos. We were pig eaters. We were mocked. We were made fun of because we were sinning. Essentially, unfortunately, we don't know the coercion. We never know the pressure that these families were under at that moment when they made those decisions. Right.
So the families that didn't make those decisions, Daniela, were burned on the stake?
I'm sorry, one more time.
The families that didn't make the decisions, were they killed right away, outright?
The families many were murdered that did not convert, and the others were stripped of all of their money, all of their possessions, and forced to walk on foot out of Spain with no property, no anything. It was on Tisha B'Av that the edict was enacted, and we were forced on foot to leave Spain. And many of my family did remain. I've actually connected with distant cousins and people that I know from the families. Many of them live here in Spot. As a matter of fact, one of my she's like a 14th cousin, also converted and lives several blocks away from me, and our children play together daily as cousins, 500 years later. So
wow. And it's so interesting too when you think about it, because one of the things that Jews did now in America is take down their mezuzahs out of fear, right? I even was in Tel Aviv recently, and I met this Tel Avivi woman who was telling me that all these Israelis out in California, which is so the antithesis of being protected, they thought they were protecting themselves by taking down their mezuzahs, but the opposite is actually true. It's so unbelievable. What we don't even know, like our history is so unbelievable, and what our people have been through is so unbelievable. And through every generation, you know what I mean? Yeah. We seem to go through similar, when you think about it, like burned at the stake. Like this is one of the things that we experienced now is the burning of bodies alive.
Absolutely. And it was one of my factors, actually. I was, I'd been in Israel for about 5 years and then was back, in the States when everything happened. And all I could think about is I need to go home. We don't belong here. I just had that very strong, like, cannot be in Hutzlaritz anymore. I couldn't. And we have a land, and I would rather be here and dealing with what I'm dealing than what many people are dealing with in Hutzlaritz.
Right. No, it's a scary world. It's mamish. Every time I open up Instagram and I see what's going on, it's getting scarier and scarier. Like that something definitely is going to blow. The question is, what is going to blow? There's definitely tremendous.
This you can wear my house for winter. Yeah.
Does somebody want to ask Daniela a question? Did someone want to ask? Charlene?
Can I ask if the stuff on YouTube is accessible? Can you put a link on your story on YouTube?
Absolutely. Yeah, I have my family's videos. There's quite a few. So yes, I will figure out a way to get that connected for you for sure.
Thank you. It was very inspiring. I admire you.
Thank you.
Charlene, do you want to try again? Charlene? We can't hear you. Okay, Daniela, this was it was such a privilege. I have to tell you that it's a privilege, mamish, for us. Like, you can't even imagine, to listen to you and to really be given a wake up call. You know, it's like you wake the rest of us up, because you really wake us up to what it means to be a Jew, and how so many people are not given that privilege, and what your family had to go through in order to take 500 years to come back in this journey.
Yeah.
And how you just came to Eretz Yisrael and you live in Svat, and how, you know, it's unbelievable. And it's so true. Like, we just have to love each other, and we have to understand that everybody's on their own journey, and how we have to open up our arms to accepting and opening up and understanding that, you know, Hashem is the one, and we are just here to be loving vessels. And unbelievable, really unbelievable.
Yeah. And so I'll leave you guys with one last thing. You know, every morning when we daven, we get to say Lo Asani Goya, right? That's such a powerful bracha for me, because hello, you know, 500 years, we didn't even get to know that we weren't. And so it's so important that, you know, we should have kavana in these brachas and really understand their meaning.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Yes.
Like, I had to leave the room for a minute, so I don't know if someone asked this, but I'm wondering why your grandmother never told you before she died that you were Jewish, and she was expecting you to find all the papers in the frame.
Yeah. The Marano community, as they call our Anusim community, is very full of fear. My grandmother was afraid to circumcise her sons for fear of being ostracized. Even 15, 20 years ago, you could not receive a high school diploma in Mexico without going into a church to get it. So there's still been a lot of things like that with, you know, of fear, and it no different than many of our people who are survivors of the Holocaust that hid that they were Jewish and secularized themselves and detached from the Jewish people out of fear and trauma. And so we're not talking about even, you know, a shorter period of time. We're talking over 400 years. The Inquisition was an active role, murdering and slaughtering Jews across the entire Latin America and Spain and, you know, Italy. It was everywhere.
And you say that 70% of Latin America has some sort of Jewish descent, some sort.
Yes. This is the estimates right now. There's even in New Mexico, the state, when they actually did DNA polls on them, almost all of them are actually Jewish, because as the Inquisition, they came into the South in Latin America and they moved up, and the Jews fled as far north, which ended up being like Texas and New Mexico. So many of the Hispanics that are in that area and have been there for many generations came back Jewish. Their DNA.
You know what's also interesting, Daniela, is that I've said, you know, if you look at the Argentinian president and his I said to one of my girlfriends, he's definitely a descendant of Jews.
Yes.
There is no way that he is not the way that he cried at the Kotel. And his connection, you definitely see that he is a descendant of Jews, for sure.
Absolutely. And there's no question. I'm sure if we started digging, we would figure that out. We saw his reaction to the Kotel. Yeah, it's there.
But what you think about also is the amount of anti-Semitism in some of these Latin countries today. And some of these anti-Semites are probably descendants of Jews, and they just don't even...
And they are, and what it is it was actually very, if my grandmother's generation, ironically, were very, they were quite anti-Semitic and very against the Jewish people. And I remember my dad said when he was young, his neighbors were Jewish and they took him to shul with him, and he used to go and enjoyed it. And then he said that, his uncles were very furious with him for going with the Jews. And, so it was even something my father was drawn to at a young age, and was going to Beit Knesset. Yeah.
Wow, that's unbelievable when you think about it. Look how saddening that is.
Yeah.
I think Shira, I know you have to get off. It's like late.
No, I wanted to say, can I say one thing?
Sure, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. I lived in New Mexico in Albuquerque, and I very much watched the history of the Jewish Marranos, and there's so many still today in the small towns in New Mexico and outside of Albuquerque that still do that. They light the candles quietly in the secret, and that's how they live up in the mountains. It's incredible, right? It's still happening today.
Yeah.
Wow.
They found the 10 Commandments etched in Hebrew, hidden in the rocks in New Mexico, where they would run into the mountains so that they could daven and not get caught. And it's actually like a monument to this day in New Mexico. And again, it's not taught. It's not public history.
Right. I know. But I know that one of the synagogues, the Reform Synagogue in Albuquerque, they had years ago, a whole thing about the Marrano Jews that was like it was incredible.
Yeah.
And my son, it's amazing.
News. Yeah.
The secrets and the fear that are still there from generations. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm coming to Spot, so I'm going to come visit you. I'm going to come visit you.
Please, but that's Hashem.
I think Chaya also had a question. Chaya, I saw that you unmuted yourself. Did you want to ask something?
No, I just wanted to say how incredibly inspiring. I'm so blessed. I feel so blessed to have met you, and you brought so much light into our lives. Right, the light you brought into us, the appreciation and the love we have for you is unfounded and is immense. And just keep doing what you're doing. You're shining beautiful light upon us. Thank you so much. Gorgeous.
Thank you, Daniela. I wish like every Jewish woman can hear this, in all different types of communities, to be inspired. I also can't wait to meet you. I can't. I'm in Jerusalem. You're in Spot.
We'll have to make this kesher for sure.
Have to. You are unbelievable. I want you to come back again, and I want even more hundreds of women to come on to listen to you, because I don't know, it felt so life-changing. I want you to know, listening to you was so life-changing. And I want to thank you so much. And I feel so happy that you came back and that you're part of this beautiful nation of incredible Jewish women. And really, thank you. Thank you so much, Daniela. Really beautiful. So privileged to have you here today. So privileged.
Thank you.
Thank you. No words. Okay, everyone. So I'm going to take us off recording.